The CIA didn't just hide documents from the American public. They took them from Congress, physically, in boxes, carried out of a congressional building by agency personnel who had no legal authority to remove them. On June 30th, 2026, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna stood before a House Oversight Committee hearing and accused the Central Intelligence Agency of conducting what she called an internal coup against the legislative branch of the United States government. Not a leak, not a classification dispute, a physical seizure of congressional documents by an intelligence agency that has decided it answers to nobody. The people elected to oversee the CIA found themselves unable to access the files that oversight requires, because the agency they are supposed to supervise walked in and took them. What you are about to hear is not a conspiracy theory. It is testimony given under oath before the United States Congress 2 weeks ago, and almost nobody covered it. The hearing room where this testimony was given looks like every other congressional hearing room. Rows of seats, a long table, microphones, the American flag. What makes this room different is what was said inside it on June 30th, 2026, and what the CIA's response to that testimony reveals about the relationship between America's most powerful intelligence agency and the government it supposedly serves. Congressional oversight of the CIA is not optional. It is a legal requirement, established by the National Security Act of 1947, the Intelligence Oversight Act of 1980, and decades of court decisions affirming that elected representatives have the right and the responsibility to know what the intelligence community is doing in the name of the American people. What happened on and around June 30th, 2026, suggests that the CIA has decided that legal requirement is something it can simply choose not to comply with. The subpoena is the most powerful legal tool available to a congressional committee. It is a direct order, backed by the full authority of the United States Congress, requiring the production of specific documents or testimony. Ignoring a congressional subpoena is contempt of Congress, a federal crime. The CIA received subpoenas related to the MK Ultra oversight hearing. The agency's response, according to testimony presented at the June 30th hearing, was not compliance, not a legal challenge filed in federal court, not even a formal letter citing specific classified exceptions. The response was to send personnel to congressional offices and physically remove boxes of documents that oversight staff had already obtained through proper channels. A federal agency responded to a congressional subpoena by taking back the documents the subpoena was designed to compel them to produce. And then they dared Congress to do something about it. The vehicles that arrived at congressional offices to remove those document boxes were not marked as CIA vehicles. The personnel who removed the boxes carried credentials, but the legal authority under which they were acting has never been publicly specified by the agency. Congresswoman Luna's staff attempted to document the removal as it happened. They were told the operation was classified. The classification of a physical seizure of congressional documents, an act that has no clear legal basis under any statute governing intelligence community conduct, was cited as the reason no further information would be provided to the elected representatives whose documents were being taken. This is the moment the story stops being about MK Ultra and becomes about something larger. Whether the CIA has decided that congressional oversight is a courtesy it can extend or withdraw at its own discretion. The boxes that were removed contain documents related to the CIA's MK Ultra program and its successor programs. Documents that congressional investigators had spent months obtaining through proper legal channels. Documents that formed the evidentiary foundation for the June 30th hearing. Without those documents, the hearing proceeded on the basis of witness testimony alone. Testimony that the CIA could dispute by citing classified information that Congress no longer had access to because the agency had taken it back. This is not an accident of bureaucratic procedure. This is a deliberate strategy, executed with precision, designed to ensure that any congressional investigation into CIA programs operates only on the information the CIA chooses to provide. The agency has effectively given itself veto power over its own oversight. And it exercised that veto 2 weeks before the most significant public hearing on CIA mind control programs in 50 years. The MKUltra program that the June 30th hearing was investigating officially ended in 1973. But the most explosive testimony at that hearing did not concern what happened in 1973. It concerned what is happening now. A former CIA officer testifying under oath stated that MKUltra never actually ended, that the research was renamed, continued under different program designations, funded through budget lines that do not appear in any document available to congressional oversight committees, and that the behavioral modification techniques developed under MKUltra have been refined, not abandoned, in the decades since the program was supposedly shut down. If that testimony is accurate, and it was given under oath, with the legal penalties for perjury fully in effect, then what Congress was investigating on June 30th, 2026 was not history. It was current operations. The documents the CIA removed from congressional offices are not the only ones being withheld. According to testimony presented at the June 30th hearing, the agency has identified categories of MKUltra-related files that it considers permanently exempt from congressional review under national security classifications that have no expiration date. These are not documents from the 1950s whose operational sensitivity has long since expired. These are documents describing program activities, personnel, and outcomes that the CIA considers too sensitive to share with the elected representatives of the American people. In 2026, more than 70 years after the programs began, the classification of information does not become more justified with age. It becomes less so. The only reason to keep 70-year-old program documents classified in 2026 is if what they describe is either still ongoing or would expose conduct so serious that disclosure would produce consequences the agency is not willing to accept. This is the moment that should have dominated every news cycle for a week. A sitting member of Congress in a formal committee hearing, on the record, accused the Central Intelligence Agency of staging what she specifically called an internal coup against the legislative branch of the United States government. The word coup was not used carelessly. It was used deliberately by a Congresswoman who understood exactly what she was saying and accepted the political and legal consequences of saying it publicly. A coup, in the context she was describing, means an intelligence agency using its institutional power to override the constitutional authority of a co-equal branch of government. Not through persuasion, not through legal challenge, through the physical seizure of documents and the refusal to comply with lawful oversight requirements. That is what she alleged happened. That allegation is in the congressional record, and the CIA has not denied it. This is the moment that should have dominated every news cycle for a week. A sitting member of Congress in a formal committee hearing, on the record, accused the Central Intelligence Agency of staging what she specifically called an internal coup against the legislative branch of the United States government. The word coup was not used carelessly. It was used deliberately by a Congresswoman who understood exactly what she was saying and accepted the political and legal consequences of saying it publicly. A coup, in the context she was describing, means an intelligence agency using its institutional power to override the constitutional authority of a co-equal branch of government. Not through persuasion, not through legal challenge, through the physical seizure of documents and the refusal to comply with lawful oversight requirements. That is what she alleged happened. That allegation is in the congressional record, and the CIA has not denied it. The legal framework that is supposed to prevent exactly this kind of intelligence community overreach has never been tested in quite this way before. The Intelligence Oversight Act requires the CIA to keep congressional intelligence committees fully and currently informed of all significant intelligence activities. It does not contain an exception for activities the CIA would prefer Congress not know about. It does not allow the agency to determine unilaterally which activities meet the threshold of significance. And it absolutely doesn't authorize the physical removal of documents from congressional custody. What the CIA did in the days surrounding the June 30th hearing has no clear legal basis under any statute governing intelligence community conduct. The agency acted as if those legal constraints do not apply to it. And the question that nobody in Washington seems willing to answer directly is, what happens if they are right? The security camera footage that captured the removal of those document boxes has never been made public. Congressional building security maintains recordings of all movement through secured areas. Those recordings exist. They show exactly who entered the congressional offices, exactly how many boxes were removed, exactly what time the operation began and ended, and exactly which personnel conducted it. Requests for that footage filed by congressional staff have been met with responses citing ongoing security reviews. The footage that would provide the clearest visual evidence of what Congresswoman Luna described as an internal coup is sitting in a federal security system, accessible to the people who have the most institutional interest in ensuring it is never publicly released. This is how institutional cover-ups work in practice. Not through dramatic destruction of evidence, through the quiet application of bureaucratic obstruction at every point where transparency might otherwise occur. The Senate Intelligence Committee has known about CIA document withholding for longer than the public has. Committee members with the appropriate security clearances have been briefed, in classified settings, on the categories of MK Ultra-related material the agency considers permanently exempt from oversight review. Those briefings are themselves classified. The senators who received them cannot discuss their contents publicly without risking criminal prosecution for disclosing classified information. This creates a situation in which the people best positioned to force accountability, senior members of the Intelligence Oversight Committees, are legally prevented from publicly describing the specific nature of what is being withheld from them. The classification system that was designed to protect legitimate national security information is being used to prevent elected officials from telling their constituents what their government is doing. That is not what classification is for. That is what classification has become. The polygraph that CIA personnel take before accessing the most sensitive program files includes questions about unauthorized disclosure of information related to ongoing behavioral research programs. That detail, confirmed in declassified CIA administrative documents, tells you something important. In 2026, the CIA considers behavioral research programs sensitive enough to include in its highest-level security screening. Not historical programs, not discontinued programs. Ongoing ones. The same agency that told Congress in 1977 that MK Ultra was over, that told the Church Committee that behavioral modification research had been terminated, that has maintained for 50 years that no successor programs exist, is screening its own personnel for unauthorized disclosure of information about current behavioral research. The polygraph questions don't lie. The agency's public statements do. The personnel who removed the document boxes from congressional offices arrived in vehicles registered to a federal contractor rather than directly to the CIA. This is not unusual for sensitive CIA operations. The agency routinely uses contractor vehicles and personnel specifically to create distance between its official institutional identity and its operational activities. What makes it significant in this context is that the use of contractor personnel to conduct what amounts to an obstruction of congressional oversight adds another layer of legal complexity to any prosecution. If the CIA used contractors to physically remove congressional documents, the chain of legal accountability becomes deliberately obscured. Who gave the order? Who authorized the contractor? Under what legal authority was the contractor operating? Each question requires answering the previous one, and the answers exist in classified documents that the CIA controls. This is the document that crystallizes everything. A congressional subpoena, torn in half. Not metaphorically. According to testimony presented at the June 30th hearing, at least one congressional document request related to MK Ultra successor programs was returned to the Oversight Committee, with a notation indicating the request itself had been referred to. CIA legal counsel for review of its classification implications. A congressional subpoena referred back to the agency it was served on, for that agency's legal team to determine whether compliance was appropriate. The CIA has effectively claimed the right to decide for itself whether congressional oversight of its activities is legally permissible. That claim has no basis in the Constitution. It has no basis in the National Security Act. It has no basis in 50 years of intelligence oversight law. And it is the operating principle under which the agency conducted itself in the weeks surrounding the June 30th, 2026 hearing. The CIA Operations Center, where decisions about congressional compliance are made, looks nothing like the facilities where the programs being investigated actually ran. It is modern, well-lit, staffed by lawyers and communications professionals, whose primary function is managing the agency's relationship with its nominal overseers in Congress and the executive branch. Those professionals are very good at their jobs. Their job, at its core, is to determine the minimum amount of information the CIA is legally required to share with Congress and to ensure that is exactly what gets shared. Not one document more. The June 30th hearing suggests that the agency has decided even that minimum is negotiable. That when the minimum required by law produces results the agency finds institutionally uncomfortable, the response is not compliance, but obstruction. Active, deliberate, physically executed obstruction of the constitutional oversight process. The lawyer who would need to prosecute the CIA for contempt of Congress works for the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is part of the executive branch. The CIA is part of the executive branch. The Attorney General who would need to authorize a contempt prosecution of the CIA serves at the pleasure of the President, who oversees both agencies. This structural reality means that the most obvious legal remedy for CIA obstruction of congressional oversight, criminal contempt prosecution, faces an institutional conflict of interest so fundamental that it has never once been successfully applied against an intelligence agency in American history. Congress can hold the CIA in contempt. It can refer that contempt to the Justice Department. And the Justice Department can decide, as it has every previous time this situation has arisen, that prosecuting one executive branch agency on behalf of the legislative branch is not an institutional priority. The congressional offices where the document removal occurred have been quietly reorganized since June 30th. Staff members who were present during the removal have given statements to committee investigators. Those statements are classified. The physical spaces where the boxes were stored have been swept for additional documents that might have been missed during the removal. Some were found. They have since been secured in a location that Congressional Legal Counsel believes is protected from further agency access. The CIA knows those additional documents exist. It knows where they are being held. And it knows that any attempt to remove them from their current location would cross a legal and political threshold that even this agency, in its current posture of institutional defiance, has not yet been willing to cross. The standoff continues. Quietly. Away from cameras, in the building where American democracy is supposed to happen. The files that the CIA has permanently withheld from congressional review contain, according to sworn testimony at the June 30th hearing, documentation of program activities conducted after 1973, the official end date of MK Ultra, activities conducted under different program names with different budget designations through different contractor relationships, but using methodologies directly descended from the behavioral modification research that MK Ultra developed between 1953 and 1973. If that testimony is accurate, what the CIA is withholding from Congress is not embarrassing historical information about programs that ended 50 years ago. It is current operational information about programs that are running right now, funded by taxpayer money, conducted on subjects who may or may not be aware they are subjects, producing results that no Congressional Oversight Committee has ever reviewed. That is the file they took back. That is what they don't want you to see. This is where the story arrives at the present moment, and the present moment is unlike anything in the history of American intelligence oversight. A congressional committee investigating CIA mind control programs has had its documents physically seized by the agency under investigation. A former CIA officer has testified under oath that the program never ended. A sitting Congresswoman has accused the CIA of staging an internal coup against the legislative branch. The full Senate Intelligence Committee torture report remains 90% classified. The MK Ultra successor program files remain permanently withheld. And the CIA has responded to every legal and political mechanism designed to force accountability with the same institutional answer it has given for 70 years. No. Not a legal no. Not a constitutional no. Just no. The agency that operates in the dark has decided that the light Congress is trying to shine on it is something it has the power to turn off. And so far, it has been right. The sworn affidavit that contains the phrase internal coup was filed with the House Oversight Committee on July 1st, 2026, the day after the hearing. It was signed by Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna and 2 senior committee staff members who witnessed the document removal firsthand. That affidavit is part of the official congressional record. It cannot be classified retroactively. It cannot be seized. It exists in the public domain, available to any journalist, researcher, or citizen who chooses to look for it. The CIA knows this, which is why the agency's response to the affidavit has been silence, not a denial, not a legal challenge, not a press statement. Silence, because any official response would require the agency to either confirm or deny specific allegations that are currently protected by classification designations the agency controls. Silence is the most legally defensible position available, and the CIA has been practicing it for 70 years. The press briefing room where this story should have been explained to the American public remained empty on the days following the June 30th hearing. No White House spokesperson addressed the allegations of CIA document seizure from Congress. No intelligence community spokesperson issued a statement. No senior official appeared before cameras to explain the legal basis for what Congresswoman Luna described. The story ran in specialized national security publications. It appeared briefly in congressional reporting. It did not lead a single major network newscast. It did not trend on social media for more than a few hours. The most significant allegation of intelligence community overreach since the Church Committee investigations of 1975 generated 48 hours of coverage and then disappeared. Not because it wasn't true, because the institutions that should have amplified it decided, each for their own reasons, that the story was too complicated, too sensitive, or too dangerous to pursue past the initial headline. The shredding machines that destroyed MK Ultra files in 1973 operated on the same institutional logic as the document removal of 2026. The specific method changes. The underlying principle does not. When the CIA determines that information poses an unacceptable risk to its institutional interests, it takes action to ensure that information does not reach audiences it cannot control. In 1973, that action was physical destruction. In 2026, it was physical seizure. The evolution from destruction to seizure is not progress. It is adaptation. The agency learned that destroying evidence creates its own legal exposure. Seizing it, classifying the seizure, and daring Congress to force its return through legal channels that the agency's own lawyers helped design. That is a more sophisticated version of the same institutional reflex. Control the information. Control the narrative. Control the oversight. And if oversight becomes inconvenient, make it disappear. The CIA headquarters building at Langley has expanded significantly since the Church Committee investigations forced the agency to operate under tighter constraints in the late 1970s. The expansion is not coincidental. Budget increases, personnel growth, and the construction of new facilities accelerated most dramatically in the periods immediately following events that temporarily increased congressional scrutiny. Scrutiny that the agency consistently managed to outlast. The pattern is consistent across 70 years. Congressional investigation, temporary constraint, institutional adaptation, expansion of capability under new legal frameworks, and eventual return to operating posture that looks remarkably similar to the one that triggered the investigation in the first place. The June 30th, 2026 hearing is the latest iteration of this pattern. What comes after it will determine whether this iteration produces a different result than every previous one. The congressional investigation file stamped "Access denied by CIA" represents something that has no precedent in the history of American intelligence oversight. Previous instances of CIA non-compliance with congressional requests involved disputed classification decisions, delayed production of documents, redaction disputes, and the kind of bureaucratic obstruction that oversight committees have learned to navigate over decades. What happened in June 2026 was different in kind, not just degree. The agency did not dispute the classification status of the requested documents. It did not file a legal challenge to the subpoena. It sent people to physically take documents back from congressional custody. That action, whatever legal justification the agency's lawyers eventually produce for it, communicates something specific about how the CIA views its relationship to congressional oversight in 2026. It views that relationship as optional. The Senate Intelligence Committee chamber, where this story should reach its conclusion, has heard versions of it before. The Church Committee, the Iran-Contra hearings, the torture report investigation. Each time, the pattern has been the same. Evidence of serious CIA misconduct, congressional investigation, partial disclosure, institutional resistance, incomplete accountability, and eventual return to business as usual. The people who have watched this pattern repeat across 50 years of intelligence. Oversight history describe a consistent dynamic. Congress has the constitutional authority to compel CIA compliance, but lacks the sustained political will to enforce that authority against an agency that has spent decades cultivating relationships with key members of both parties. The CIA doesn't need to win the legal argument. It needs to outlast the political moment. It has done so every previous time. The question of whether June 30th, 2026 represents a different kind of moment is still being answered. The burned document fragments that represent the most extreme version of CIA evidence management tell a story that the June 2026 document seizure updates rather than replaces. The agency has moved from destroying inconvenient evidence to controlling its location. The underlying objective, ensuring that specific information does not reach audiences outside the agency's control, remains identical. What has changed is the legal exposure. Destroying evidence creates criminal liability. Seizing and classifying it creates a legal dispute. Legal disputes can be managed. Criminal liability is harder to contain. The evolution of CIA evidence management from destruction to seizure represents institutional learning, not institutional reform. The agency has gotten better at achieving the same objective through methods that are harder to prosecute. That is not accountability. That is adaptation. And an agency that adapts to avoid accountability rather than accepting it is an agency that has decided accountability is something that happens to other institutions. Here is where the story stands on the day this video goes live. The documents are still in CIA custody. The congressional subpoenas remain technically non-compliant. Congresswoman Luna's affidavit alleging an internal coup sits in the congressional record, undenied by the agency it accuses. The former CIA officer who testified that MK Ultra never ended has not been charged with perjury, which means the agency has not officially disputed his testimony in any legal forum. The full Senate Intelligence Committee report on MK Ultra successor programs, if such a report exists, has not been released. And the political will to force a direct confrontation between Congressional Oversight Authority and CIA institutional resistance has not yet materialized into the kind of sustained, bipartisan, legally backed pressure that would be required to actually change the outcome. The storm is directly overhead. The lightning has already struck. What happens next depends entirely on whether the people with the authority to act decide that this time the pattern has to change. The evidence case that holds what remains of this story is sealed in ways that mirror every previous chapter of CIA accountability avoidance. Documents in classified custody, testimony protected by security agreements, witnesses bound by non-disclosure obligations that survive their employment. The legal tools that exist to force disclosure have been used before and have produced partial results at best. The political tools that exist to force accountability have been deployed before and have produced temporary constraints that the agency has consistently outlasted. What is different about June 2026 is that the obstruction happened in public, on the congressional record, in a building full of cameras, in a proceeding that was live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of viewers. The CIA has always operated in darkness. What it did in June 2026, it did in daylight. And the question of whether daylight changes the outcome of a confrontation that darkness has always won before is the question that defines this moment in American history. And this is the line that should stay with you. Not from a classified document, not from a redacted report, from the official congressional record of the United States House of Representatives, entered on July 1st, 2026, by a sitting member of Congress who put her name on it and accepted the consequences. The CIA seized documents from Congress. They called it classified. They sent no legal justification. They offered no public explanation. They simply took the files and dared the legislative branch of the United States government to do something about it. And on the blacked-out page where the explanation should be, where the legal authority should be cited, where the constitutional basis for an intelligence agency overriding congressional oversight should be spelled out, there is nothing. Just those 4 words that tell you everything about where American democracy stands in the summer of 2026. Documents still withheld. The file isn't closed. It was never yours to open. And the people who took it back are counting on you forgetting that you ever had it.